So at the dictionary, if we looked in a dictionary, and we did look in a bunch of lexicons, what does the word Hamas mean? And they gave us several definitions. But so here I'm going to make a distinction between a dictionary that is prescriptive and descriptive.
Okay, what's the difference?
So a prescriptive dictionary is what we all grew up at school
Webster's?
looking in. Webster's.
Okay.
Right? The teacher would say, you use that word, look up, you used it wrong, look up and see what it means. And you'd look it up and it would tell you, these are the 4 sanctioned definitions. We're prescribing to you what it means.
And then they give you a sentence and pronunciation.
Right, and if it's not in that dictionary, it doesn't mean that.
Okay, that's prescriptive.
Now, in reality, we have a lot of words in our speech that don't mean in the dictionary what the dictionary says. Or let me rephrase that. We have a lot of words in our speech that mean in our speech, in our daily usage, they have meanings that aren't in the dictionary. And that's why they're updating the dictionary all the time. So when I was at Hebrew University at Mount Scopus, they had something called the Oxford English Dictionary, which was like 20 volumes. It filled up an entire, it was like the size of this couch, the lengthwise, or the volumes, and lined up on the shelves. And it's a descriptive dictionary. It doesn't just tell you what the word means. It says, here's what it meant in the 1600s, and here's how we know. Here's an example of how it was used. And here's what it meant in the 1700s. How do we know? Because it was used in these 3 instances. And then sometimes there'll be usages that existed in the 1600s that aren't around today, and vice versa. So why is that important? What we need to do is, what I want to do is reverse engineer what the descriptive dictionary did. So when you look at a biblical Hebrew lexicon, the authors of the Bible didn't use those dictionaries because they didn't exist. What the authors of those dictionaries did is they looked at all the verses in the Bible and they said, okay, what are the 4 definitions of Hamas? And let's give examples of each one. And they may have missed some, right? Because they're doing every word in the Bible. We have the advantage here of where we spent several months on one word, right? So
we did.
So we probably put a lot more energy into the word Hamas than they did. And that's what people in my field will later do, is they'll write an article and they'll say, a new meaning of this word has been discovered that nobody ever noticed. Happens all the time.
We wanted to see for ourselves.
Yeah.
Not what the dictionary said, but what it meant.
Well, and how do we know that? And how
what
is
the
it
Tanakh
used?
actually says
How is
about
it used in the Tanakh, right?
Yeah.
We're also going to do a second thing later where we're going to do something the dictionaries also do, which is comparative Semitic linguistics. So Hebrew is part of a family of languages. And the importance of the comparative Semitic linguistics is Hebrew was the Tanakh was written over 2,000 years ago, right? 2,500. The last book in the Tanakh, well, depending when you think it was written, around 2,500 years ago. And it was written over a period of 1,000 years. So it's, look, if I was to look up a word in English, I would say, what does this word mean in the English language in the 1600s? I'd look in the dictionary, and I'd look in the Oxford English Dictionary, and if I found a meaning that I didn't find in the Oxford English Dictionary, then I'd say, wait a minute, okay, what does this word mean? And that happens, by the way. English linguists actually encounter this, where they'll find a word, and they're like, okay, is this some dialect, a local dialect of a certain part of New York or something, of upstate New York? That's an actual example. Or maybe it's a certain dialect of a certain part of Scotland or something, because we don't...
Like here in North Carolina is our brogue that you and I...
Right, well, that's pronunciation. So the question is, do they have words that we don't know from anywhere else in English?
Okay.
And I won't give an example, but because we're going to go down a rabbi trail there, or a rabbit trail. So, but the point is that not everything in the English language is in the dictionary, but here's the important thing. The body, or what we call the corpus of English literature, is over 1 billion words. The corpus of the Hebrew Bible is much less than that. The Hebrew Bible is about 1,000 pages, and then you maybe have some inscriptions, right? And the inscriptions are mostly, there were 3 ephahs of flour that were sent to the Kittim, right? Okay, and it's more and more of that in the 3rd year, right? And there was 5 ephahs of flour and 3 of wine or whatever, right? Right. So so we have a lot of Hebrew inscriptions, but we don't have a lot of words from those inscriptions, right? Meaning it's the same word over and over because they're mostly like administrative lists. And then we have inscriptions like, for example, the Siloam inscription or the Shiloach inscription in Jerusalem, where we know every single word in that inscription except one. And there's one word that's unique in the entire history of the Hebrew language that has survived. Now, that might have been a common word that people used every day, But the Bible in the 1,000 pages just never mentioned that word.
Didn't you have a story about that, like with a broom or somebody that was?
No, that was where they forgot the meaning of a word in Isaiah.
Oh, they forgot it.
So,
Okay.
but it was a unique word in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But it was a word that was so Isaiah says, and they will sweep away, or I will sweep away Babylon with the broom of destruction. And the rabbis were discussing this verse, and they said, what is this word broom? They didn't know what it was, right? It's matateh. They had no idea what it was until they heard the maidservant they saw her hand a broom to her subordinate and say, take the broom and sweep the floor. And they said, oh, that means broom. It's that thing that we have in our houses. But in the Tanakh, it only appears, I think, in that one place. And it wasn't part of the learned dialect that the rabbis knew when they spoke Hebrew and studied Hebrew. But the maidservant knew it. And there it's like the brogue of North Carolina. You go to these fishing villages in the Outer Banks, and you have a few hundred people who speak a specific dialect that nobody else speaks, and they might have words that were used hundreds of years in English that nobody else uses anymore.
Right.
And that's what happened with the broom of destruction in Isaiah, that the rabbis learned the word from this maidservant. Why the maidservant? She probably came from some distant village where they still spoke Hebrew and used words that had been forgotten in the big cities.
Do we know how many times Hamas was used?
Ooh, we can look that up. I don't think I checked that.
I think that was
in our months of
interesting.
study.
I know, I was just thinking, I don't think I have that written down either.
So
and
it appears 68 times in 67 verses.
Wow.
Yeah, and there might be other forms of it I'm not including. So, but that is the verb at least appears. Or no, it's a noun actually in that form. No, that's the noun and the verb. All right. So, what are the definitions of Hamas in the Hebrew, in the Tanakh? And this is an important principle. The Bible needs to interpret the Bible because what the word means today might not be what it means in biblical Hebrew. I was once giving a talk in southern Israel, actually in some of the areas that were attacked on October 7th. And I was giving a talk to a group about the Aviv while we were going out and looking at the Aviv. And there was this Israeli woman who was listening in on us. And I explained Aviv in biblical Hebrew refers to a state of the ripening of the barley. And she interjects, like Israelis will, into other people's conversations that have nothing to do with them. And she'll say, that's not true. Aviv means spring. And I said, thank you so much for saying that, ma'am. I'm sure I didn't say that. That's what I would say today. I was probably rude. But why did she say that? Because in modern Hebrew, Aviv means spring. And from the 14th century, we can talk about, and here it's from a descriptive dictionary, right? Mm-hmm. Around the 14th century, if I remember correctly, the meaning of spring starts to appear in Hebrew literature. Before that, it didn't mean spring, right? It meant this stage in the ripening of the barley. So the point is words change over time, and we have to interpret the Tanakh based on the Hebrew of that day. And when we look at later Hebrew, we're treating it like another Semitic language, essentially.